The wind screamed through the canyon like a wounded animal, and Beatrice Warren knew she was going to die in this God-forsaken wilderness, pregnant and alone, abandoned by the man who had promised her everything and delivered only heartbreak and frozen tears on her cheeks. Her feet had stopped feeling anything an hour ago, maybe two. She could not tell any more as time blurred into nothing but white and cold, and the desperate need to keep moving forward, even though forward seemed to lead nowhere but deeper into the blizzard that had swept down from the mountains without warning. The stagecoach driver had put her out 3 miles back when she could not pay the remainder of her fare, and Marcus, the man who had gotten her with child and sworn to marry her in Carson City, had simply watched from his seat beside another woman, a painted lady with rouge on her cheeks and no conscience in her eyes. He had not even looked ashamed. Beatrice stumbled over something buried in the snow and went down hard on her knees, the impact sending a shock of pain through her swollen belly. She was 6 months along, showing clearly even through her threadbare coat, and the baby kicked as if in protest of the cold that was seeping into both their bones. She tried to stand, but her legs would not cooperate, and she realized with a strange sense of detachment that this was how it ended. 20 years old and dying in a snowstorm in the Nevada Territory in December of 1872. Her dreams of a new life out west turning to ice crystals on her eyelashes. The darkness at the edges of her vision was actually inviting, warm somehow, and she let herself sink into the snow that was already covering her like a burial shroud. She thought of her mother back in Philadelphia, who had warned her not to trust Marcus Thornton with his smooth words and empty promises, who had begged her not to go west with a man who had no ring to offer and no honor to back his sweet talk. She had been so foolish, so eager to escape the suffocating propriety of her father's house, and the prospect of marrying the elderly banker he had chosen for her. At least the baby would not have to grow up knowing its mother was a fool. She closed her eyes and waited for the cold to finish its work, but instead of the final darkness, she heard something that made no sense at first, a sound that cut through the howling wind like a knife through butter. Hoofbeats, heavy and steady and coming closer. Then a man's voice, rough and urgent, shouting words she could not quite make out over the storm. Strong hands gripped her shoulders and turned her over, and she forced her eyes open to see a face above her, weathered and strong-jawed, with eyes the color of summer sky even in the midst of all this white death. He was saying something, his mouth moving, but the wind stole his words until he leaned closer, so close she could feel his breath on her frozen cheeks. "Can you hear me? Stay with me now, stay awake." She tried to answer, but her lips would not move properly, and he cursed under his breath, a sharp and vicious sound that somehow made her feel safer because it meant he cared whether she lived or died. He scooped her up as if she weighed nothing despite her pregnant belly, and she felt herself being lifted onto a horse, felt his body behind hers, solid and warm as he wrapped his heavy coat around both of them and spurred his mount forward into the storm. The ride was a blur of motion and cold in the steady beat of the horse's hooves, and she drifted in and out of consciousness, aware only of the man's arms around her, holding her securely against his chest, and his voice in her ear, low and constant, telling her to hold on. Just hold on a little longer. They were almost there. She had no idea where there might be, and she was too far gone to care, but his determination was like an anchor keeping her from floating away entirely. When they finally stopped, he dismounted in one smooth motion and pulled her down after him, carrying her through a doorway into warmth and light that made her eyes water. She heard him calling out for someone named Rose, and then there were other hands helping, gentle female hands, and she was being laid on something soft, a bed or a settee, and blankets were being piled on top of her while someone worked at her frozen boots. "Good Lord, Jackson, where did you find her?" The woman's voice was sharp with concern. "3 miles out on the Carson City Road, lying in a snowdrift. She is with child, Rose. We need to warm her up slow or we will lose her. And the baby too, most like. Get me more blankets from the chest and put water on to heat. Not too hot, mind you, we do not want to shock her system." Beatrice felt consciousness slipping away again. But this time, it was not the cold darkness of death, but rather the warm darkness of exhausted sleep, and she let herself fall into it without resistance. When she woke, she had no idea how much time had passed, but the room was dim with evening light or perhaps early dawn, and the blizzard still raged outside the windows she could see from where she lay. Her whole body ached, but it was the ache of returning life rather than approaching death, and when she moved her hands to her belly, the baby kicked reassuringly beneath her palms. "You are awake." The man's voice came from somewhere to her left, and she turned her head to see him sitting in a chair beside the bed, his elbows on his knees and his hands clasped together. In the lamplight, she could see him more clearly now. A man probably in his late 20s with dark brown hair that needed cutting and a face that looked like it had been carved from the same granite as the mountains outside. He was handsome in a rough-hewn way, all sharp angles and weathered skin, but it was his eyes that caught her, blue and intense and filled with a concern that seemed out of proportion for a stranger he had found in the snow. "Where am I?" Her voice came out as a croak, and he immediately reached for a cup on the bedside table, helping her sit up enough to drink. The water was cool and sweet, and she drank greedily until he gently took the cup away. "My ranch, about 5 miles outside of Winnemucca. I am Jackson Gray." "You are safe here, Winnemucca." She repeated the word as if it might mean something, but her geography of Nevada was hazy at best. "I was going to Carson City." "Not in this storm, you were not. What were you doing out there alone?" His tone was not accusatory, merely curious, but she felt shame wash over her nonetheless. "The stagecoach driver put me out when I could not pay the rest of my fare. I had enough to get me part way, but not all the way, and he said he would not carry charity cases." She did not mention Marcus. That humiliation was still too raw, too fresh. Jackson's jaw tightened, and she saw anger flash in his eyes, though she sensed it was not directed at her. "He put a pregnant woman out in a blizzard over a few dollars. I will be having words with him when the storm clears. Please do not. It will only cause trouble, and I have caused enough of that already." She looked down at her hands, at the gold ring she had bought for herself in a fit of pride back in Sacramento, wanting to at least pretend she was respectable even if she was not. "I should not have come west. I should have stayed where I belonged." "And where was that?" "Philadelphia. My father has a shipping business there. I was supposed to marry a man he chose for me, someone appropriate and dull and 40 years my senior. Instead, I fell in love with a charmer who promised me the moon and stars, and delivered me pregnant and penniless in the middle of nowhere." She did not know why she was telling this stranger her sad story, except that there was something about him that invited confidence, a quiet strength that made her feel like he could hear the worst of her foolishness and not judge her too harshly for it. He was silent for a long moment, and when he spoke, his voice was carefully neutral. "The father of your child, where is he now?" "On his way to Carson City with his new lady friend. He left me behind without a backwards glance." The words hurt to say, but there was also a strange relief in speaking them aloud, in admitting the depth of her stupidity to someone who did not know her, who had no expectations of her beyond not dying in his care. Jackson stood abruptly and walked to the window, looking out at the white world beyond. Rose is my housekeeper and the closest thing to a doctor we have in these parts. She says you and the baby seem to be doing all right considering, but you need rest and warmth and proper food. You are too thin for a woman carrying a child. I have not had much money for proper food lately. She pulled the blankets higher, suddenly aware that she was dressed only in a nightgown that must belong to this Rose woman, and that her own clothes were nowhere in sight. I appreciate your kindness, Mr. Gray, but I cannot stay here. It would not be proper, and I have already ruined my reputation quite thoroughly enough without adding to the scandal. He turned to look at her, and there was something fierce in his expression that made her breath catch. You have nowhere else to go, and that storm is going to last another day at least, maybe two. When it clears, if you want to leave, I will take you wherever you want to go. But right now, you are staying here, and that is the end of it. She should have argued, should have insisted on preserving what little dignity she had left, but the truth was she did not have the strength for pride anymore, and the bed was warm and soft, and for the first time in months she felt safe. So instead of protesting, she simply nodded and let her eyes drift closed again, and when she woke next, the room was dark and quiet except for the sound of the dying storm outside. Over the next 3 days, as the blizzard gradually wore itself out and the sky began to clear, Beatrice learned more about the man who had saved her life. Jackson Gray was 28 years old, the son of a rancher who had died 2 years earlier and left him this land and the cattle that grazed on it. He ran the ranch alone except for Rose, who was actually his late mother's cousin, and had come to help out after his father passed. He was quiet and hardworking, up before dawn to tend the animals even in the aftermath of the storm, and he spoke little but always with a deliberateness that suggested he meant every word he said. Rose was a tiny woman in her 50s with sharp eyes and a sharper tongue, but her hands were gentle when she examined Beatrice's belly and pronounced both mother and child healthy despite their ordeal. She asked no questions about Beatrice's circumstances beyond what was necessary for her care, and if she judged the situation, she kept her opinions to herself, which was more charity than Beatrice had any right to expect. On the 4th day after her rescue, Beatrice was strong enough to get out of bed and dress in the spare clothes Rose had found for her. Simple work dresses that were too big in some places and too tight in others but were clean and whole, which was more than she could say for her own ruined things. She made her way down to the kitchen, where Rose was kneading bread dough with vigorous efficiency. "You should still be resting," Rose said without looking up from her work. "I have rested enough. I need to do something useful, or I will go mad from idleness." Beatrice looked around the warm, tidy kitchen, so different from the elegant but cold rooms of her father's house in Philadelphia. "Please, let me help. I can cook and clean and do laundry. I need to earn my keep." Rose paused in her kneading and looked at her directly. "You are not a servant here, girl. You are a guest who has been through an ordeal. I am a pregnant woman with no money and no prospects, and your cousin and his hospitality are the only things standing between me and dying in the snow. The least I can do is make myself useful." Something like respect flickered in Rose's eyes, and she nodded toward the larder. "There are potatoes that need peeling for supper and vegetables to chop for a stew. If you are going to insist on working, you might as well make yourself properly useful." So Beatrice set to work, and it felt good to have something to do with her hands, some purpose beyond simply existing and being a burden. She was halfway through the potatoes when Jackson came in from outside, stamping snow from his boots and bringing with him a blast of cold air that made her shiver despite the warmth of the kitchen. He stopped short when he saw her at the work table, surprise crossing his face. "You should be in bed." "So everyone keeps telling me. I am fine, Mr. Gray. The best thing for me right now is to be up and moving, not lying about like an invalid. She kept her eyes on the potato in her hands, suddenly shy in his presence in a way she had not been when she was too weak to care about propriety. He crossed to the stove and poured himself coffee from the pot that was always simmering there, and she was aware of him watching her as he drank. You have good color back in your cheeks. That is a relief. Thanks to you and Rose. I owe you my life, Mr. Gray, and my child's life as well. I do not know how I can ever repay such a debt. You do not owe me anything. His voice was gruff, almost angry, as if the idea of being repaid offended him. Any decent person would have done the same. But you were the one who actually did it. You rode out in a blizzard and found me when you could have been safe and warm in your house. That is not nothing, no matter how much you want to dismiss it. He set down his coffee cup with more force than necessary. I was out checking the herd. One of my pregnant cows was missing, and I could not leave her out there in the storm. Finding you was pure chance. Then I am grateful for chance, and for stubborn ranchers who care more about their animals than their own safety. She finished the potato and reached for another, and they worked in silence for a few minutes, the only sounds the thud of Rose's dough and the scrape of Beatrice's knife and the wind rattling the windows. Finally, Jackson spoke again, his voice lower, more hesitant. When the roads are clear, where will you go? It was the question she had been avoiding thinking about, because the answer was nowhere. She had no money for the stage to Carson City, and even if she did, what would she do there? She had no skills beyond the accomplishments of a wealthy merchant's daughter, things like watercolors and passable French and the ability to plan a dinner party. Out here, those talents were worth less than nothing. I do not know, she admitted. I suppose I will figure something out. You could stay here. The words came out rushed, as if he had been holding them back and they had finally broken free against his will. Just until the baby is born, I mean. You need somewhere safe, and we have the room. Rose could use help around the house, and you could work off your room and board. After the baby comes, if you still want to leave, I will give you money for passage to wherever you want to go. Beatrice set down her knife and turned to look at him fully. He was staring into his coffee as if it held the secrets of the universe, his jaw tight and his shoulders tense, and she realized with a start that he was nervous about her answer. This hard, capable man who had ridden into a blizzard without hesitation was nervous about whether she would accept his offer of help. Why would you do that? She had to ask, had to understand. You do not know me. For all you know, I could be a thief or a liar or worse. He looked up at her then, and the intensity in his blue eyes made her heart skip. Because I know what it is like to need help and not have anywhere to turn. When my father died and left me this ranch, I was drowning in debt and had no idea how to keep the place running. Rose came out from Missouri and helped me when she had no obligation to do so. She saved me, and now I have a chance to help someone else who needs saving. That seems like reason enough. There was more to it than that. She could sense it in the way he looked at her, in the careful way he spoke, but she did not push. Instead, she glanced at Rose, who had stopped kneading and was watching them both with an unreadable expression. What do you think, Rose? Would you mind having me underfoot? Rose snorted. Mind? Girl, I have been running this house on my own for 2 years and I am not getting any younger. If you are willing to work and not complain, I would welcome the help. But Jackson is right. This is just until you are back on your feet. We are not running a charity here, and I will expect you to earn your keep. I will. Beatrice felt tears pricking at her eyes, and she blinked them back fiercely. She had cried enough over Marcus and her own foolishness, and these people deserved better than her weepy gratitude. Thank you. Both of you. I promise I will work hard and not cause any trouble. Jackson's expression softened slightly, almost a smile but not quite. "I believe you. Now finish those potatoes before Rose decides we are both more trouble than we are worth." And just like that, Beatrice Warren found herself with a new home, at least temporarily, in a ranch house outside Winnemucca, Nevada, in the middle of one of the harshest winters the territory had seen in years. It was not the life she had imagined when she left Philadelphia, was not even close to the dreams she had spun when Marcus had whispered promises in her ear, but it was something real and solid, and for now, that was enough. The days fell into a rhythm that was at once foreign and comforting. Beatrice woke early, helped Rose prepare breakfast for Jackson before he went out to tend the cattle, then spent the mornings cleaning and mending and learning the thousand small tasks that kept a ranch house running. In the afternoons, when her back ached and the baby pressed heavy on her bladder, Rose would shoo her into the parlor to rest, and sometimes Jackson would come in from the cold and sit with her, the two of them talking quietly about everything and nothing. She learned that he had grown up on this land, that his mother had died when he was 12, and his father had been a hard man made harder by grief and whiskey. She learned that he loved his cattle more than most people loved their children, that he could track a missing cow through 3 feet of snow and find his way home in the dark by the shape of the mountains against the stars. She learned that he read poetry when he thought no one was watching, and that his favorite meal was Rose's beef stew with extra potatoes, and that he had a scar on his left hand from when a rattlesnake had struck him when he was 15. In turn, she told him about Philadelphia, about the suffocating expectations of society life and the endless round of teas and balls and meaningless conversations. She told him about her mother, who had died when Beatrice was 17, and her father, who had never quite forgiven her for being born a daughter instead of a son. She told him about Marcus, though it hurt to speak his name, about how charming he had seemed and how completely he had fooled her. And Jackson's expression had gone cold and dangerous in a way that made her glad Marcus Thornton was far away in Carson City. "He will get what is coming to him," Jackson said quietly. "Men like that always do." "I hope not." The words surprised her even as she spoke them. "I hope he finds whatever he is looking for and becomes a better man for it." "I do not wish him ill. I just wish he had been honest with me from the start." Jackson looked at her as if she were something rare and precious. "You have a kind heart, Beatrice Warren, kinder than most people deserve." She felt heat rise in her cheeks and looked away, suddenly aware of how close they were sitting on the parlor settee, of how his presence seemed to fill the room in a way that Marcus's never had. Marcus had been all flash and charm, quick words and quicker hands, but there had been no substance beneath the surface. Jackson was the opposite, all depth and quiet strength, and she found herself drawn to him in a way that both thrilled and terrified her. Christmas came and went quietly, marked by a special dinner that Rose outdid herself preparing and a small gift from Jackson, a hand-carved rattle for the baby that must have taken him hours to make. Beatrice had nothing to give in return except her gratitude, but he seemed content with that, and they spent the evening in the parlor while Rose dozed by the fire, talking about the year ahead and what it might bring. January brought more snow and bone-deep cold, but also a kind of peace that Beatrice had never known in her old life. She was happy here, she realized with some surprise, happier than she had been in the fancy house in Philadelphia with all its comforts, happier than she had been traveling west with Marcus and his empty promises. The work was hard and her back ached, and she missed her mother with a fierceness that sometimes took her breath away. But there was something deeply satisfying about falling into bed, each night exhausted from honest labor, about knowing that she was earning her place in the world rather than simply occupying it by accident of birth. And then there was Jackson, always Jackson, his presence as steady and reliable as the mountains themselves. She caught herself watching him when she thought he was not looking, admiring the way he moved with unconscious grace, the way his hands were gentle with the animals despite their roughness, the way he listened when she spoke as if her words actually mattered. She knew she was falling in love with him, knew it was foolish and dangerous and possibly the worst idea she had ever had given how spectacularly her last romantic entanglement had ended, but she could not seem to stop herself. The baby was due in March, and as February arrived with its promise of eventual spring, Beatrice found herself both eager and terrified of what was to come. She had never been around babies much, had no idea how to care for an infant, and the prospect of actually giving birth filled her with a dread she tried hard to hide. Rose sensed her fear, though, and sat her down one afternoon to talk through what to expect, clinical and matter-of-fact in a way that was more comforting than any soft reassurances could have been. "It will hurt," Rose said bluntly. "Anyone who tells you different is a liar. But women have been having babies since the dawn of time, and you are strong and healthy. You will get through it, and I will be right there with you the whole time." "What if something goes wrong?" Beatrice could not help asking. "What if I cannot do it? Then we will deal with it. But worrying about what might happen is useless. Save your strength for what is actually in front of you." Rose patted her hand, an uncharacteristically tender gesture. "You are going to be a good mother, Beatrice. You have more steel in you than you realize." That evening, as Beatrice was helping Jackson bring in firewood, she felt the baby kick particularly hard and she gasped and pressed her hand to her belly. Jackson dropped the logs he was carrying and was at her side instantly, his face pale. "What is wrong? Is it the baby?" "No, no, everything is fine. The baby is just very active today." She smiled at his concern and, on impulse, reached for his hand and placed it on her belly where she could feel the baby moving. "Feel that?" His eyes went wide as he felt the kick beneath his palm, and something passed over his face, an expression of such wonder and longing that it made her chest tight. "That is incredible. I have felt pregnant cows and horses, but this is different. This is a person in there. A person who seems determined to kick their way out early." She kept her hand over his, holding it in place. "Jackson, I need to tell you something." He looked at her, his blue eyes serious in the firelight from the hearth. "What is it?" "I know I said I would leave after the baby was born, but I do not want to go. I want to stay here if you will let me. I can keep helping Rose and I can earn my way. I swear I will not be a burden. This place, it feels like home in a way nowhere else ever has. And you and Rose, you feel like family." The words came out in a rush, and she held her breath waiting for his response. He was quiet for so long she thought he might refuse, might tell her that the offer had only ever been temporary and she needed to move on. But then he turned his hand so that his palm was against hers, their fingers interlacing, and when he spoke his voice was rough with emotion. "I do not want you to leave. I have not wanted that from the moment I pulled you out of that snowdrift. When I saw you lying there, so still and pale, something inside me just knew that you were important, that I could not let you die. And every day since then, that feeling has only gotten stronger." He paused, seeming to gather his courage. "I know your heart has been hurt, and I know you have every reason not to trust another man's words. But I need you to know that when I found you that day when I said I would keep you safe, I meant for as long as you would let me. Not just until the baby comes. Forever if you want it." Beatrice felt tears spilling down her cheeks, but they were good tears for once, tears of relief and joy and something very much like hope. "I want it. I want to stay. I want to build a life here with you if you will have me. If I will have you." He laughed, a sound she had never heard from him before, rich and full of genuine happiness. "Beatrice, I would have you any way I can get you. As my housekeeper, as my friend, as my wife if you will have me, though I know it is too soon to ask that properly. Our family starts today." The words came to her lips without thought, feeling right and true. "That is what you said when Rose asked who I was that first day when you brought me here. You told her I was family now. You meant it, did not you? Every word." He pulled her closer, careful of her belly, and pressed his forehead to hers. "Our family starts today. You and me and this baby who is not even mine but who I already love because they are part of you. That is what I want if you want it too. I do." She was crying in earnest now, and he gently wiped away her tears with his thumbs, his touch so tender it made her heart ache in the best possible way. "I love you, Jackson Gray. I know it is too soon, and I know I am probably being foolish again, but I cannot help it. I love you." "Then be foolish with me." He kissed her forehead, her cheeks, the tip of her nose, and finally, softly, her lips. It was nothing like the urgent, demanding kisses Marcus had given her, kisses that had been about taking rather than giving. This was a promise, a beginning, a wordless vow that she felt all the way to her soul. When they finally pulled apart, Rose was standing in the doorway to the kitchen with her arms crossed and an expression of satisfaction on her face. "Well, it is about time you two figured that out. I was beginning to think I would have to knock your heads together." Jackson laughed again, and Beatrice found herself laughing too, giddy with happiness and relief and the simple joy of being exactly where she was supposed to be. "How long have you been standing there, Rose?" Long enough to hear Jackson make a fool of himself with all that romantic talk, though I suppose it worked, given the way she is looking at you. Rose's expression softened. "I am happy for you both. You are good for each other, and that is a rare thing in this world." Over the next few weeks, as winter gradually loosened its grip on the land, and the first hints of spring began to appear, Beatrice and Jackson's relationship deepened into something solid and real. They were careful with each other, aware that she was still healing from Marcus's betrayal, and that he had his own scars from a lonely life and a hard childhood. But there was an ease between them that felt natural, as if they had known each other for years rather than months. Rose started teaching Beatrice about ranching, the practical side of managing cattle and land, and she proved to be an eager student. She could not ride yet, not in her condition, but she learned about feeding schedules and how to spot signs of illness in the herd, about mending fences and the 100 other tasks that went into keeping a ranch running. Jackson seemed pleased by her interest, and they would spend evenings planning the spring roundup and discussing which cattle to sell and which to keep for breeding. "You have a good head for this," he told her one night as they reviewed the ranch accounts by lamplight. "Better than mine, honestly. I can keep the cattle alive, but the business side has never been my strength. I watched my father run his shipping company for years. I paid attention even though he never thought a daughter would need such knowledge." She traced the column of numbers with her finger, doing quick calculations in her head. "If we sell the yearling steers at market in Carson City, we should have enough to buy that breeding bull you have been wanting, with some left over to repair the barn roof." Carson City. He said the name carefully, watching her face. "Does it bother you, the idea of going there?" "No," she realized with some surprise that it was true. "Whatever I felt for Marcus, it is gone now. He has no power over me anymore. Besides, he is probably long gone by now, off to chase whatever dream caught his fancy next." Jackson reached across the table and took her hand. "If we do see him, if he tries to cause trouble, I will handle it. You have my word. I know you will, but I do not think it will come to that. Men like Marcus do not look back. They are too busy running toward the next thing to ever consider what they left behind. She squeezed his hand. I am grateful to him in a strange way. If he had not abandoned me, I would never have found you. I am grateful to that stage driver, fool that he was, for putting you out where I could find you, though I would still like to have words with him about his complete lack of decency. She smiled. My fierce protector, what would I do without you? You will never have to find out. He raised her hand to his lips and kissed her knuckles. I am not going anywhere, Beatrice. You are stuck with me. Good. She stood, awkward with the weight of the baby, and he was immediately at her side, helping her balance. I should go to bed. This little one seems to think my ribs make an excellent punching bag, and I need to lie down before they break something. He walked her to her room as he did every night and kissed her good night at the door, chaste and sweet and full of promise. Sleep well. I will see you in the morning. But in the middle of the night, Beatrice woke to a sharp pain in her belly and a wetness between her legs that made her heart race with sudden fear. It was too early. The baby was not due for another 3 weeks, but her body clearly had other plans. She called out for Rose, trying to keep her voice calm even as panic clawed at her throat. Rose appeared in minutes, her hair in a nighttime braid and a lamp in her hand, and took one look at Beatrice before springing into action. Jackson, she bellowed toward his room. Get up and boil water, lots of it. The baby is coming. The next hours were a blur of pain and effort and Rose's steady voice guiding her through each contraction. Jackson appeared at one point, his face pale and his eyes wild with worry. But Rose shooed him out again, telling him he would be more use making sure they had supplies ready. Beatrice wanted to call him back, wanted his hand to hold, but another contraction hit and she forgot everything except the overwhelming need to push, to get this baby out of her body before the pain tore her apart. You are doing fine, Rose kept saying. Just breathe through it, that is right, now push when I tell you. It went on forever, or maybe only an hour. Time had no meaning in the midst of such intensity. But finally, she felt something shift and release, and then there was a new sound in the room, a thin, reedy wail that was the most beautiful thing she had ever heard. It is a boy, Rose announced, wrapping the baby in a clean cloth and placing him on Beatrice's chest. Small but healthy, good lungs on him. Beatrice looked down at her son, this tiny person she had carried for months without ever really believing he was real, and felt her heart crack open in a way that was painful and wonderful all at once. He was red-faced and wrinkled, his eyes screwed shut against the brightness of the lamp, and he was absolutely perfect. "Hello, little one," she whispered, tears streaming down her face. "I am your mama. I am so glad you are finally here." Rose finished tending to Beatrice, then went to get Jackson, who practically ran into the room and stopped short when he saw Beatrice holding the baby. He approached slowly, as if afraid he might break something, and when Beatrice held the baby out to him, he took the bundle with a reverence usually reserved for holy relics. "He is so small," Jackson breathed, staring down at the baby with wonder. "And perfect. Look at his little hands." "Would you like to hold him properly?" Beatrice was exhausted, every muscle in her body aching, but seeing Jackson with her son filled her with a warmth that pushed back the tiredness. Jackson sat carefully on the edge of the bed, cradling the baby against his chest, and the baby stopped fussing almost immediately, as if he recognized that he was safe. "What will you name him?" Beatrice had thought about this during the long winter nights when she could not sleep. "Benjamin. Benjamin Warren, after my mother's father, who was the only member of my family who ever let me be myself. Benjamin Warren." Jackson tested the name, then looked up at her with an expression that made her breath catch. "And what about his last name?" Does he stay a Warren, or would you consider letting him be a Gray? She understood what he was really asking, and her heart swelled with love for this man who had saved her life and claimed her child as his own without hesitation. Are you asking me to marry you, Jackson Gray? I am. I know it is soon, and I know we have only known each other a few months, but I also know that I love you and I want to spend the rest of my life with you. I want to give this boy my name and raise him as my son, and I want to have more children with you if you are willing, and I want to build something lasting here on this land with you by my side. He paused, and when he spoke again, his voice was thick with emotion. I cannot promise you fancy parties or an easy life, but I can promise you honesty and loyalty and a love that will not waver no matter what comes. Will you marry me? Yes. The word came out without hesitation, because there was nothing to hesitate about. This man, this place, this life, it was everything she needed and more than she had ever dared to hope for. Yes, I will marry you, and yes, Benjamin can be a Gray, and yes to everything you just said. He leaned forward and kissed her, still holding the baby carefully between them, and Rose made a noise that might have been approval or exasperation or both. Well, now that is settled, I suppose I should go make breakfast. Having a baby is hungry work. After Rose left, Jackson stayed with Beatrice and Benjamin, the three of them cocooned in the warm intimacy of new beginnings. Benjamin nursed for the first time, latching on with a fierce determination that made both adults laugh, and then fell asleep in that boneless way of newborns, utterly trusting and content. He is beautiful, Jackson said softly, stroking the baby's downy hair with one gentle finger. You are beautiful. I am the luckiest man in Nevada. I am the lucky one. 3 months ago I was dying in a snowstorm, and now I have everything I never knew I wanted. She leaned her head against Jackson's shoulder, exhaustion finally catching up with her. How did this happen? I found you in the snow and said our family starts today. I meant it then, and I mean it even more now. He pressed a kiss to the top of her head. Get some rest, love. I will watch over you both. She wanted to protest that she was not tired, but her eyes were already closing, and she let herself drift off with the sound of Jackson's heartbeat beneath her ear and the weight of her son in her arms. When she woke, it was late afternoon, and Rose was sitting in the chair beside the bed with Benjamin in her arms, rocking him gently. There you are. I was beginning to think you would sleep straight through until tomorrow. How long was I asleep? Beatrice struggled to sit up, her body protesting every movement. About 6 hours. The baby has been fed twice, thanks to the sugar water I gave him, and Jackson has been pacing a hole in the parlor floor waiting for you to wake up. Rose stood and brought Benjamin to her, and Beatrice took him eagerly, that fierce protective love already as natural as breathing. I should feed him again, and I should get up and help with dinner. You will do no such thing. You just had a baby girl. You are staying in that bed for at least 3 days, and I do not want to hear any arguments about it. Rose's tone brooked no disagreement. Jackson and I can manage the house just fine. You focus on recovering and learning how to be a mother. Over the next week, Beatrice did exactly that, and it was harder than anything she had ever done. Benjamin was a good baby, healthy and strong, but he woke every 2 hours to eat and seemed to have his days and nights confused, sleeping peacefully through the afternoon and screaming through most of the night. She was exhausted and sore, and her milk had come in with a vengeance that made her chest feel like it was full of hot rocks. And there were moments when she understood with perfect clarity why some women went mad after childbirth. But there were also moments of pure transcendent joy, like when Benjamin opened his eyes for the first time and seemed to actually see her, or when he wrapped his tiny fist around her finger with surprising strength, or when Jackson came in from the cold and scooped the baby up with such tenderness that it made her want to cry. Those moments made all the hard parts worth it, made her grateful beyond words that she had survived to experience this. By the end of February, Beatrice was back on her feet and helping around the house again, though Rose strictly limited what she was allowed to do and threatened to tie her to a chair if she overdid it. Benjamin was gaining weight and developing a personality, becoming less of a sleepy newborn and more of an actual person who seemed to have opinions about everything from bath time to being put down for naps. Jackson was completely besotted with him, spending every free moment holding him or talking to him in that nonsense voice people use with babies. He made more carved toys, a whole menagerie of animals that would eventually decorate Benjamin's room, and he sang old cowboy songs while he worked, his voice rough but surprisingly pleasant. One evening in early March, as the three of them sat in the parlor after dinner, Benjamin asleep on Jackson's chest and Beatrice curled up beside them, Jackson brought up the subject of the wedding. "We should do it soon, before the spring roundup. Once that starts, I will be gone for days at a time, and I do not want to leave you and Benjamin alone that long without making you my wife properly." "How soon are we talking?" Beatrice trailed her fingers along Benjamin's back, marveling at how tiny he still was. "Next week, if we can arrange it. We will need to ride into Winnemucca to get the license and find someone to perform the ceremony. The circuit preacher should be through town around then if he is keeping to his usual schedule. Next week." It seemed impossibly fast and yet not fast enough. What about a dress? "And we should have a meal, something special to mark the occasion." "Wear whatever you want. You will be beautiful regardless. And Rose is already planning the meal, I guarantee it. She has been waiting for this since January." Jackson shifted Benjamin to his shoulder, patting his back gently. "I know it will not be the grand society wedding you probably imagined when you were a girl, but I promise to make it special. I do not want a grand society wedding. Those are for show, for impressing people who do not matter. I want something real, something that is just us and the people we care about." She reached up and touched his face, feeling the rasp of stubble beneath her palm. "I want to marry you, Jackson Gray, and I do not care if we do it in a church or a barn or the middle of a field. As long as we are together, that is all that matters." He turned his head and kissed her palm. "Have I mentioned recently that I love you? Not in the last hour or so. You are getting terribly lax in your romantic declarations. I will have to remedy that immediately. I love you, Beatrice Warren. I love your strength and your kindness and the way you hum while you work when you think no one is listening. I love how you are with Benjamin, patient even when you are exhausted. I love your laugh and your smile, and the way you look at me like I hung the moon even though we both know I am just a rancher who got lucky enough to find you in a snowstorm. Keep talking like that, and I might have to kiss you, and Rose will scold us for being indecent in the parlor. Rose is in the kitchen and cannot hear us. Kiss me anyway." So she did, slow and sweet, the baby sleeping between them like a promise of all the tomorrows they would have together. And when they finally pulled apart, Jackson was smiling that rare, genuine smile that made him look years younger. And Beatrice thought that maybe, just maybe, her foolish decision to trust Marcus Thornton had been the best mistake she ever made, because it had led her here to this moment, to this man, to this life that was so much better than anything she could have planned. They rode into Winnemucca 3 days later, Benjamin bundled warmly against the cold and Rose accompanying them to help with the baby while Beatrice and Jackson handled the legal necessities. The town was small but bustling, miners and ranchers and merchants all going about their business, and Beatrice felt a flutter of nervousness as they dismounted in front of the county office. "Are you ready?" Jackson asked, offering her his arm. "More ready than I have ever been for anything." She took his arm, and together they went inside to file for the marriage license. The clerk was a middle-aged man with ink-stained fingers and a bored expression that brightened considerably when he saw Benjamin. "Well now, that is a fine-looking baby you have there. Boy or girl?" "Boy." "His name is Benjamin." Beatrice felt a surge of maternal pride that she was still getting used to. "A good, solid name. Now, what can I do for you folks today? We are here to file for a marriage license," Jackson said, his hand warm on the small of Beatrice's back. The clerk pulled out the necessary forms and began asking the standard questions: name and age and place of birth. And Beatrice answered without hesitation until he got to the question about previous marriages. "Have either of you been married before?" "No," Jackson said. "No," Beatrice echoed, and realized with a start that it was true. She had never been married, had never even been engaged, for all that she had believed Marcus when he talked about their future together. She was coming to Jackson free and clear, with no legal ties to her past. The clerk filled out the rest of the form, took their payment, and stamped the document with a flourish. "There you are. You have got 30 days to find someone to perform the ceremony, and then you will need to file the completed license back here to make it official. The circuit preacher is at the church on 3rd Street if you are looking for someone today." They found the preacher in the small, whitewashed church, an elderly man with kind eyes and a booming voice that seemed too large for his small frame. He agreed to marry them that very afternoon, and they sent Rose to fetch supplies for a small celebration, while Beatrice and Jackson stood in the empty church and said their vows with only the preacher and Benjamin as witnesses. "Do you, Jackson Gray, take this woman to be your lawfully wedded wife, to have and to hold from this day forward, for better or worse, for richer or poorer, in sickness and in health, until death do you part?" "I do." Jackson's voice was steady and sure, his blue eyes locked on Beatrice's face. "And do you, Beatrice Warren, take this man to be your lawfully wedded husband, to have and to hold from this day forward, for better or worse, for richer or poorer, in sickness and in health, until death do you part?" "I do." The words felt sacred, weighty with promise. "Then by the power vested in me by the territory of Nevada, I pronounce you husband and wife. You may kiss your bride." Jackson did, thoroughly and with an enthusiasm that made the preacher chuckle and shake his head. When they finally broke apart, Beatrice was breathless and grinning, and Jackson looked happier than she had ever seen him. "Mrs. Gray," he said, testing out the name. "Mr. Gray," she replied, and felt a rush of joy so intense it was almost frightening. "My husband, my wife." He kissed her again, softer this time, and Benjamin chose that moment to wake up and start fussing, making them both laugh. They had the marriage certificate filed before they left town, making it official and legal, and then they met Rose at the general store where she had purchased supplies for a celebration dinner. The ride back to the ranch was cold but clear, the sky that particular brilliant blue that only happens in the mountains, and Beatrice felt like she was seeing everything with new eyes, as if marrying Jackson had somehow made the world brighter. Rose outdid herself with dinner, roasting a chicken that one of the neighbors had traded for some of Jackson's beef, and making all of Beatrice's favorite side dishes along with a cake that was slightly lopsided but delicious. They ate in the dining room, which they almost never used, and Jackson gave a toast that was short and heartfelt. "To my wife, who I found in a snowstorm and who has given me more happiness in 3 months than I had in all the years before. And to Benjamin, who is not my blood but is my son in every way that matters. May we have many more years together, and may our family grow and prosper on this land." "To family," Rose echoed, raising her glass, and to love, which has a way of finding us even when we are not looking for it. They clinked glasses, and Beatrice felt tears prickling at her eyes again, but they were happy tears, grateful tears, and she did not bother trying to hide them. This was her family now, these people who had taken her in when she had nothing and given her everything. She was Jackson's wife, Benjamin's mother, and she had a home and a purpose, and a future that stretched out bright and promising ahead of her. That night, after Benjamin was finally asleep in the cradle beside their bed, Jackson made love to Beatrice with a tenderness that made her feel cherished and precious. And afterward they lay tangled together, skin to skin, and talked about all the things they wanted to do in the years ahead. "I want to expand the herd," Jackson said, his fingers tracing idle patterns on her back. "And maybe build a bigger barn, something that can hold more cattle through the winter. I want to learn to ride properly once I am fully healed. And I want to keep the ranch accounts if you will trust me with them. I like the work of making the numbers balance. I trust you with everything I have, including my heart." He kissed her forehead. "What about more children? Do you want more, or is Benjamin enough?" She thought about it, remembering the pain of childbirth, but also the overwhelming joy of holding her son for the first time. "I want more. Not right away, but someday. I want Benjamin to have brothers and sisters, to grow up with a real family around him. Then that is what we will have." He sounded content, settled in a way she suspected he had not been for most of his life. "As many children as you want and a house full of noise and love. That sounds perfect." She closed her eyes, exhaustion pulling at her even though she wanted to stay awake and savor this moment. "Jackson." "Echem. Thank you for finding me. Thank you for saving me." "You saved me too," he said softly. "I did not even know I needed saving until you came into my life, but you made me whole in a way I have never been before. So thank you for not dying in that snowstorm, and thank you for trusting me enough to stay." She was too tired to formulate a response, but she squeezed his hand and let herself drift off to sleep, safe and warm and loved in a way she had never imagined possible. The spring roundup came and went, and with it the hard work of branding new calves and moving the herd to better grazing land. Jackson was gone for days at a time, and Beatrice discovered that she missed him with an intensity that surprised her, missed his steady presence and his quiet strength, and the way he made her feel like she could handle anything as long as he was beside her. But she also discovered that she was capable of more than she had thought, managing the ranch accounts and helping Rose with the endless work of keeping the house running and caring for Benjamin, who was growing at an alarming rate and developing new skills seemingly every day. When Jackson finally came home, dusty and exhausted and smelling of cattle and sweat, she launched herself at him with such enthusiasm that he staggered backward, laughing as he caught her. "I missed you too," he said, holding her tight. "Where is Benjamin?" "Napping, which means we have approximately 30 minutes before he wakes up demanding to be fed." She pulled back far enough to kiss him properly. "I have plans for those 30 minutes. Do you now?" His eyes heated, and he scooped her up and carried her to their bedroom, kicking the door shut behind them. They made use of their time efficiently, and afterward lay catching their breath while they listened for sounds from the cradle in the next room. "We should probably go check on him," Beatrice said reluctantly. "Probably." But Jackson made no move to get up, and neither did she, and they stole a few more minutes of quiet togetherness before Benjamin's cries finally forced them out of bed. Summer arrived with its heat and dust, and the endless work of maintaining fences and monitoring water sources for the cattle. Beatrice learned to ride, wobbling at first but gaining confidence quickly, and soon she was accompanying Jackson on his rounds, Benjamin strapped to her chest in a sling that Rose had fashioned. The baby seemed to love being outside, his eyes tracking the movement of birds and clouds with solemn concentration. And Jackson joked that he was going to be a rancher before he could walk. In July, a letter arrived from Philadelphia, forwarded through multiple addresses before finally reaching her. It was from her father, and Beatrice's hands shook as she opened it, unsure what to expect. The letter was stiff and formal, as was her father's way, but there was an underlying current of concern that she had not expected. He had heard through mutual acquaintances that she had left the East with a man named Marcus Thornton, and when he had made inquiries, he had discovered that Thornton was a known gambler and confidence man who had left a trail of broken promises across 3 states. Her father wanted to know if she was all right, if she needed money or help, if there was anything he could do to bring her home. Beatrice read the letter twice, then sat down at the kitchen table and wrote a response that took her the better part of an afternoon to compose. She told him that she was well, that she had married a good man and had a son, that she was living on a ranch in Nevada, and was happier than she had ever been in Philadelphia. She did not go into details about Marcus, or about being abandoned pregnant in a blizzard, but she made it clear that her life now was everything she had hoped for and more. She also, after much deliberation, extended an invitation for him to come visit, to meet his grandson and see for himself that she was thriving. She did not expect him to accept, knew that her father was not the sort of man who traveled lightly or forgave easily, but she felt better for having offered. When she showed the letter to Jackson, he read it carefully and then looked at her with a question in his eyes. "Do you want him to come?" "I do not know. Part of me does, the part that still remembers being a little girl and wanting his approval, but I also know that he will judge everything about my life here, will find it lacking compared to what he wanted for me." She sighed. "Either way, I needed to tell him I am all right. He deserves to know that much. If he does come, we will make him welcome, and if he cannot see how incredible you are and how much you have built here, then that is his failing, not yours." Jackson pulled her into his arms, and she let herself lean against him, drawing strength from his unwavering support. Her father did not come that year, but he did write back, a slightly warmer letter that included a bank draft for a substantial sum, and a note that it was for Benjamin, to be used for his education when he was older. It was not approval exactly, but it was acknowledgement, and Beatrice decided that was enough for now. As autumn arrived and the leaves turned gold on the cottonwoods along the creek, Beatrice discovered she was pregnant again. She told Jackson one evening after dinner, watching his face carefully for his reaction. "Already." He looked surprised but not displeased. "Benjamin is not even a year old yet." "I know. Rose says it happens sometimes, especially if you are nursing. The baby will be due in late April or early May, right around the anniversary of when you found me." She bit her lip. "Are you unhappy?" "Unhappy? No, of course not. Surprised, yes, but happily so." He placed his hand on her still flat belly. "Another baby, another member of our family." "You are sure? It will be harder this time with Benjamin to care for as well, and I will not be able to help as much around the ranch. We will manage. We always do." He kissed her softly. "I love you, Beatrice. Every child we have is a blessing, and I will never complain about having more of them. This pregnancy was easier in some ways and harder in others." She was not dealing with the emotional trauma of abandonment and near death, which helped, but she was also chasing after an increasingly mobile Benjamin, who had learned to crawl and was determined to get into everything he could reach. She was tired constantly, more so than the first time, and there were days when she fell into bed before the sun had even set, too exhausted to keep her eyes open. But Jackson was patient and supportive. taking over more of Benjamin's care in the evenings so she could rest. And Rose made sure she ate well and took her vitamins. And gradually, she adjusted to the new reality of her changing body. By the time winter arrived again, she was noticeably pregnant, her belly round and prominent, and Benjamin had learned to pat it gently and say "baby" in his sweet toddler voice. On a cold December day, exactly 1 year after Jackson had found her in the snowstorm, they bundled up and went out to the spot where he had pulled her from the snowdrift. Someone, probably Jackson, had placed a wooden marker there, and when Beatrice saw it, she felt tears spring to her eyes. "What is this?" She approached the marker, which had been carved with simple but elegant letters. "It is a reminder," Jackson said, his arm around her waist, "of the day our family started. Of the day I found you and Benjamin found his way into the world, even if he did not arrive for a few more months. This place, it is important. It is where everything changed." She read the carving again, the words blurring through her tears. Here, December 1872, a life was saved and a family was born. She turned to Jackson and buried her face in his chest, overwhelmed by the thoughtfulness of the gesture. "I love you so much it frightens me sometimes. I know the feeling." He held her close, and they stood there in the cold, looking at the marker and thinking about all that had happened in the past year. All the ways their lives had changed and grown and become something better than either of them could have imagined alone. Christmas that year was a joyous affair, with Benjamin old enough to be delighted by the carved animals Jackson had made for him, and the simple cloth doll Rose had sewn. They invited some of the neighboring ranchers for dinner, and the house was full of laughter and warmth, and Beatrice felt a contentment so deep it was almost painful, a happiness that was rooted not in fleeting pleasure but in genuine connection and shared purpose. As winter turned to spring and her pregnancy progressed, Beatrice found herself thinking about Marcus less and less, until whole weeks would go by without him crossing her mind at all. He was part of her past, a mistake that had led to something wonderful, but he had no place in her present or her future. She was Jackson's wife, Benjamin's mother, and soon she would be mother to another child, and that identity was more real and solid than anything she had been before. In late April, on a warm spring day when the wildflowers were blooming across the meadows and the cattle were fat and content, Beatrice went into labor. This time she knew what to expect, and while it was no less painful, there was less fear, and Rose was there to guide her through each contraction with the same steady competence as before. The baby came faster than Benjamin had, arriving in the early evening just as the sun was setting. It was another boy, bigger than Benjamin had been and with a lusty cry that made Rose laugh. "He is going to be a handful, this one. Listen to those lungs." Jackson burst into the room the moment Rose called him, and he went straight to Beatrice, kissing her forehead and her cheeks and her lips. "You are amazing. Are you all right? Tired, but yes. Meet your son." She held the baby out, and Jackson took him with the same reverence he had shown Benjamin, cradling the newborn against his chest. "He looks like you," Jackson said, studying the baby's face. "He has your nose and your chin." Poor child. But Beatrice was smiling, too happy to be self-deprecating. "What should we name him?" They had discussed names throughout the pregnancy but had not settled on anything definite. Now, looking at the baby in Jackson's arms, Beatrice knew exactly what felt right. "James. After your father, if you do not mind. I know you two had a complicated relationship, but he gave you this land and this life, and I think he would be proud of the man you have become." Jackson's eyes went suspiciously bright, and he nodded, unable to speak for a moment. When he finally found his voice, it was rough with emotion. "James Gray. Thank you, Beatrice. That means more than I can say. James and Benjamin, We are going to need a bigger house at the rate we are going." She was only half joking. Their current home was adequate but not spacious, and with 2 children under 2, space was becoming a concern. "We will build one. This summer, I will hire some help and we will add on, give the boys their own room and us more space." He sat carefully on the edge of the bed, still holding James, and Benjamin toddled over from where Rose had been entertaining him, curious about the new arrival. "Baby," Benjamin announced, pointing at his brother with pride. "That is right, Benjamin. This is your brother James. You are going to help take care of him, are not you?" Beatrice reached out and ruffled Benjamin's dark hair, so like Marcus's in color but hopefully nothing like him in temperament. Benjamin nodded solemnly, then lost interest and went back to his toys, and the adults laughed at his toddler attention span. Over the next few weeks, as Beatrice recovered and James settled into the family, they fell into a new rhythm, more chaotic than before but no less loving. Jackson was true to his word and hired builders to expand the house, adding 2 new bedrooms and a larger kitchen. And by midsummer, they had space to breathe and room for the family to continue growing. The years passed in a blur of hard work and simple joys. Benjamin grew into a serious, thoughtful boy who loved the cattle and followed Jackson everywhere, absorbing lessons about ranching and responsibility. James was more boisterous, always getting into mischief and making Rose shake her head in exasperation. But he had a sweet heart and a laugh that could brighten the darkest day. In 1875, Beatrice gave birth to twin girls, Alina and Catherine, and the house was suddenly full of noise and diapers and the constant motion of 4 small children. Jackson hired more help for the ranch so he could spend more time with the family, and Beatrice learned to manage a household that seemed to expand daily, her organizational skills from her Philadelphia upbringing finally proving useful in this Western life. Her father came to visit that summer, traveling from Philadelphia for the first time in his life, and Beatrice was nervous about his arrival in a way she had not expected. But when he stepped off the stagecoach in Winnemucca, and she saw how he had aged, how much smaller and frailer he seemed than the towering figure of her childhood, her nervousness faded into something gentler. "Hello, Father." She approached him carefully, unsure of her welcome. He looked at her for a long moment, taking in her simple dress and sun-brown skin and the baby she held on her hip, and then he did something completely unexpected. He pulled her into an embrace, awkward and stiff but genuine nonetheless. "You look well, Beatrice. Happy." "I am. Very happy." She pulled back and gestured to Jackson, who was standing a few feet away holding Benjamin's hand. "Father, this is my husband, Jackson Gray, and our children. The boy is Benjamin and this is Catherine." Her father shook Jackson's hand, measuring him with a businessman's eye, and Beatrice held her breath waiting for judgment. But whatever he saw must have satisfied him because he nodded slowly. "A rancher. Honest work." "Yes, sir, I do my best to provide for your daughter and our children." Jackson's voice was respectful but not subservient, and Beatrice felt a rush of pride at how he held his ground without being aggressive. "I can see that." Her father glanced around at the town, then back at Beatrice. "Shall we go to this ranch of yours? I have traveled a long way, and I confess I am curious to see how you live." The visit was surprisingly pleasant. Her father spent 2 weeks with them, and while he was clearly out of his element on a working ranch, he made an effort to understand Beatrice's new life. He held his grandchildren and listened to their chatter with more patience than she would have credited. And he had long conversations with Jackson about cattle prices and land management that seemed to leave both men with grudging respect for each other. On his last evening, he took Beatrice aside for a private conversation in the parlor while Jackson put the children to bed. "I owe you an apology," he said without preamble. "I was a poor father, too focused on business and propriety to see that you were unhappy. When you left with that scoundrel Thornton, I was angry, but I was also afraid that I had driven you to such a desperate act. Father, you do not need to apologize. I made my own choices, foolish as they were." She reached out and took his hand, something she had never done as a child. "And those choices led me here, to Jackson and this life. I have no regrets. You should, though. You should regret that I did not raise you to value yourself more highly, that I pushed you toward a man you did not love because I thought I knew what was best." He squeezed her hand. "But I am grateful that you survived my failures as a parent and found something real. Your husband is a good man, better than that banker I wanted you to marry, and your children are lovely. You have built something meaningful here. Thank you." She felt tears welling up, the approval she had craved for so long finally given freely. "That means everything to me. I have rewritten my will," he continued. "When I die, the shipping business will go to my partner's son, as we have long planned. But there is a substantial sum set aside for you and your children, and the house in Philadelphia will be yours if you ever want to sell it. I want you to have security, Beatrice, even though it is clear you do not need my money to be happy. I will not refuse your generosity because I know it comes from love. But you are right, I do not need it. I have everything I need right here." She glanced toward the stairs, where she could hear Jackson's voice reading a bedtime story to the children. "This is my home now, and these are my people." Her father left the next morning with promises to write more often and to perhaps visit again in a year or two if his health permitted. Beatrice watched the stagecoach disappear down the road and felt a sense of closure, of old wounds finally healing. She had her father's blessing, but more importantly, she had her own certainty that she had made the right choice, that this life was the one she was meant to live. The children continued to grow and thrive. Benjamin showed an aptitude for ranching that delighted Jackson, and by the time he was 10, he was helping with the cattle drives and learning to rope and brand. James was more interested in the business side, spending hours with Beatrice as she managed the accounts and planned for the future. The twins were inseparable, always together and always plotting some mischief that kept the household lively. In 1878, Beatrice had one more child, a girl they named Rose after the woman who had been Beatrice's rock through so many trials. The original Rose, now in her 60s and showing her age, was delighted by the honor and doted on little Rose with shameless favoritism that made the other children laugh and compete for her attention. Jackson added more land to the ranch, purchasing adjacent properties as they became available, and the Gray Ranch became one of the more prosperous operations in the region. They were not wealthy by any means, but they were comfortable, able to provide for their children and put money aside for their education and futures. One evening in the summer of 1880, as they sat on the porch watching the sun set over the mountains, their children playing in the yard and the sounds of their laughter floating on the warm air, Jackson turned to Beatrice with a smile. 8 years, he said. Has it really been 8 years since I found you in that snowstorm? 8 years and 5 children. We have been busy. She leaned against his shoulder, content and peaceful in a way that had become as natural as breathing. Do you ever think about what might have happened if I had not gone out looking for that cow that day? If I had been a few minutes slower or taken a different route? Sometimes. But I try not to dwell on what might have been. We are here now, and that is what matters. She laced her fingers through his. You ever regret it? Saddling yourself with a pregnant stranger and all the complications that came with her, he laughed, a sound that still made her heart skip even after all these years. Not for a single second. You and these children, You are the best thing that ever happened to me. I was half a person before you, just going through the motions of living. You made me whole." "We made each other whole," she corrected. "I was lost and you found me, but you were alone and I gave you a family. We saved each other. Our family starts today," he quoted, remembering that first declaration. "I meant it then and I mean it now. Every day with you is a new start, a new chance to build something better." They sat in comfortable silence, watching as Benjamin helped James climb a tree, as Alina and Catherine chased fireflies, as little Rose toddled after them, all with determined concentration. This was their family, built from tragedy and chance and the simple choice to love each other despite the odds. It was not perfect, nothing in life ever was, but it was real and solid and theirs. As the stars began to appear in the darkening sky, and the children reluctantly came inside for bedtime, Beatrice thought back to that desperate girl lying in the snow, convinced she was going to die alone and unmourned. That girl would never have believed that this future was possible, that she could be this happy, this fulfilled, this deeply loved. But here she was, surrounded by the life she and Jackson had built together, and every day was a gift, every moment a reminder that sometimes the worst mistakes lead to the best outcomes, and sometimes being lost is the only way to find where you truly belong. Jackson had been right all those years ago when he pulled her from that snowdrift and promised her safety. He had given her so much more than that. He had given her a home, a purpose, a family, and a love that would last the rest of their days. And it all started on a cold December day in 1872, when a cowboy out looking for a lost cow found something far more valuable in the snow, and decided without hesitation that their family started that day. Years continued to unfold with the predictable rhythm of ranch life, punctuated by unexpected moments of grace. The children grew, and eventually, the older ones began to make their own paths. Benjamin married a rancher's daughter from the neighboring county when he was 22, bringing her home to help run the expanding gray operation. James went east for a few years to study business, making his grandmother Rose proud before his death at 67, and returned to help manage the financial side of the ranch with a sophistication that elevated their operation to new heights. The twins married brothers in a double wedding that was the talk of Winnemucca for months, settling close enough that Sunday dinners remained a boisterous family tradition. Little Rose grew into a spirited young woman who shared her namesake's sharp tongue and kind heart, eventually becoming a teacher in the growing town and dedicating her life to education rather than marriage, a choice her parents supported even when society raised eyebrows. Through it all, Jackson and Beatrice remained the steady center, their love deepening with each passing year into something that went beyond romance into true partnership. They weathered droughts and harsh winters, cattle diseases and economic downturns, the death of dear Rose, and the arrival of grandchildren who filled the expanded house with noise and joy. On a December evening in 1892, 20 years exactly from the day Jackson had found Beatrice in the snow, they bundled up against the cold and walked out to the marker that Jackson had carved so long ago. They were both in their 40s now, showing the wear of hard work and Western life, but still strong and healthy, and devoted to each other in a way that made their children roll their eyes affectionately at their parents' continued romance. 20 years, Beatrice said, reading the weathered words on the marker. Sometimes it feels like a lifetime, and sometimes it feels like yesterday. The best 20 years of my life. Jackson pulled her close, and she rested her head against his shoulder exactly as she had done thousands of times before. Thank you for not dying in this spot. Thank you for staying alive long enough for me to find you. Thank you for being stubborn enough to ride out in a blizzard looking for a lost cow." She tilted her face up to kiss him, their breath frosting in the cold air. "Thank you for saying our family starts today and meaning it with your whole heart. I would do it all again in a heartbeat. Every moment, every struggle, every joy, all of it led us here, to this life we have built together." They stood there as the sun set and the stars emerged, two people who had found each other against impossible odds and created something lasting and true. Their family had started on this spot 20 years ago, and it would continue long after they were gone. A legacy of love and resilience and the simple courage to choose hope even in the darkest moments. As they finally turned to walk back to the warm house where their children and grandchildren waited, where dinner would be served, and stories would be told, and life would continue in all its messy, beautiful complexity, Beatrice squeezed Jackson's hand and felt nothing but gratitude for the cowboy who had found her abandoned and pregnant in the snow and given her everything she never knew she needed. Their family had started that cold December day, and it would last forever, written into the land and the hearts of everyone who came after them, a testament to the power of love and the grace of second chances.